A Place Called Home by Laurie Wick. Chapter 49. Hey, you're all bundled up. Don't tell me you're going somewhere. I just arrived. Luke, I got a letter from Spooner today. I need to go see Mark. Will you take me and then stay while we talk? Luke looked at Christine's face. She was pale, and he could tell she'd been crying. Wordlessly, he led her to the cutter. Some of the snow had melted off, and Christine wondered absently whether Christmas, only a few days away, would be a white one. When Luke and Christine arrived, with Christine obviously upset, Maggie discreetly took the children and withdrew upstairs with them. After the four adults were alone, Mark astutely guessed the problem. "You've heard from Spooner." Christine nodded. "Mrs. Hall's letter came today. Carl Maxwell is dead. Mark, how can God let this happen? Carl was the only one who could answer my questions." Christine began to cry, and Luke's arms went around her from his place next to her on the divan. Sue's eyes also filled with tears, and Mark reached for her hand. "Christine," Mark said after she had composed herself, "what else did the letter say?" Christine sniffed and pulled the letter from her skirt pocket. She handed it to Mark, who read it, and then gave it to Luke. "Listen, Christine, Mrs. Hall has not finished going through your grandfather's things yet. The sheriff is still on the job, and I think you've known deep in your heart for some time now that Carl Maxwell was probably dead. Am I right?" Christine nodded. Luke spoke up, correctly reading her mind. "Christine, none of this is your fault. I'm sure you feel helpless, but right now, all that any of us can do is trust God to straighten this out." Mark and Sue added their words of encouragement, and Christine began to feel somewhat better. When Christine seemed in control again, Sue went to the kitchen to fix coffee. Mark went with her. Once Luke and Christine were alone, Christine stood up and moved away from him. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Everyone I get close to dies. If you don't want to see me anymore, Luke, I'll understand." Luke was across the room in an instant and taking Christine's arms in his hands. Turning her around to face him, his words of rebuke at her foolish talk died in his throat at the misery he saw in her eyes. How could he explain to her that he was in over his head? If he told her about the burned man now, it would scare her witless. And the idea of no longer seeing her was like asking Luke Cameron to stop breathing. "Christine, you haven't been listening to me. I love you. When a person loves someone, he doesn't run when he's needed the most. I'm going to be here beside you, taking care of you, loving you, and praying for you until you're sick of me." "I will never be sick of you." Suzanne had started through the door back into the living room when she stopped so abruptly that Mark nearly ran into the back of her with the tray he was carrying. Shifting to one side, Mark saw what had stopped his wife. In the front room stood Luke, holding in his arms the woman he loved. Knowing the way Christine was hurting, Mark and Sue wouldn't have interrupted them for anything, save another fire. Mark put the tray back in the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "I think my brother had the right idea," Mark said as he pulled Sue against him. She looked up as she leaned against Mark's chest, her head not even up to her husband's chin. "It's almost like watching you out there holding Christine." Mark's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I can see, Mrs. Cameron, that if you've had time for such wild ideas, I've been neglecting you. I shall remedy that instantly." Suzanne giggled and raised her mouth for his kiss. The Cameron twins' thoughts at that moment were running on identical tracks. Home is anywhere, as long as this woman is in my arms.